Adrian Walker invited his ex-wife to his lavish wedding for one reason: to disgrace her. He believed he had staged the perfect humiliation. At Bayford's most extravagant celebration, he reserved a front-row seat for Liana Carter, certain she would arrive looking worn, lonely, still barren after all these years. But when a sleek black Bentley slid to a stop at the entrance, whispers rippled instantly through the hall. The door opened. Liana stepped out, draped in golden silk that gleamed like sunlight. And what left the entire room in stunned silence were three little boys, their tiny hands clasped tightly around hers. 3 sons. The very woman Adrian once called worthless now stood as living proof of everything he had lost. And this was only the beginning. In the busy coastal city of Bayford, Adrian Walker was known by everyone. He was young, wealthy, and powerful, a man whose life sparkled with luxury. Expensive suits hung in his wardrobe, the newest cars waited in his garage, and every weekend he filled the night with parties that lasted until dawn. To the world, Adrian was untouchable, but behind the glitter, there was a shadow. Adrian was obsessed with one thing: having an heir, a son to carry his name, to prove his legacy. For 7 long years, Liana Carter had stood beside him. She had married him when he had nothing, when all he carried was ambition and a promise of tomorrow. She gave him her love, her loyalty, her youth, but year after year, her womb remained silent. No child came to their home, no small footsteps echoed in their halls. At first, there had been patience, hope, doctor visits, prayers whispered into the night. But over time, Adrian's patience turned to bitterness, and his love hardened into blame. One evening, the weight of 7 years broke through his pride. He came home restless, his face set with anger. He threw his keys onto the table and his voice shook the walls. 7 years, Liana, 7 years and nothing to show. Do you expect me to die without an heir? Liana's eyes filled with tears. She tried to reach him with trembling words. Adrian, please. We can try again. Another doctor. Another chance. But Adrian's heart had already turned cold. His laugh was sharp, cruel. Hope? I am tired of hope. My friends mock me. My mother demands a grandson, and you give me nothing. What use is a wife who cannot give her husband a child? His words fell like knives, cutting deep into her soul. And from that night, the bond that had once promised forever began to unravel. That night, the house grew colder than stone. Liana sat at the edge of the bed, her hands pressed together, shaking as if in prayer. Adrian paced the room like a man trapped in his own fury, each step heavier than the last. At last, his voice cut through the silence. Enough. I will not waste another day of my life. Tomorrow I will call my lawyer. This marriage is over. The words struck her harder than any blow. She lifted her face, streaked with tears. Divorce? After everything I gave up for you, after I left my family, after I stood by you when you had nothing. Adrian turned to her, his eyes hard, his voice merciless. Love does not give me an heir. You have failed me, Liana. You should have been gone long ago. Her body trembled, her voice cracked as she begged one last time. Please, Adrian, give me more time. God can still give us a miracle. But he pulled away, his words colder than ice. Do not bring God into this. The problem is you. And when I return tomorrow, I do not want to see you in this house again. Liana packed in silence. Every dress folded into her bag carried the memory of vows broken, of dreams torn apart. The mansion that had once been her home now felt like a prison spitting her out. She stepped into the night with nothing but a small bag in her hand. The streets of Bayford stretched before her, dark and endless. She whispered into the cold wind, her voice fragile but fierce. "I leave with nothing, but I will not break. God will fight for me." And so she walked on, heart shattered, yet carrying a flame of defiance that refused to die. Through the sleepless streets of Bayford, Liana walked with her small bag clutched to her chest. Neon signs flickered above her, cars rushed by, but no one noticed the woman wandering in the night. No one knew she had just lost her marriage, her home, and the life she once believed in. In her mind, one name rose above the despair. Serena Brooks, her friend since college. Fierce, loyal, the kind of woman who would fight for those she loved. It was nearly midnight when Liana knocked on Serena's door. The door swung open, and Serena gasped at the sight before her. "Liana! My God! What happened to you?" Liana collapsed into her arms, sobbing until she could barely breathe. And through broken words, she confessed, "Adrian. He cast me out. He said I was useless. He said I am the reason we have no child." Serena's eyes burned with anger. Her voice rose like fire. That arrogant fool. 7 years, and he never once checked himself. How does he know the problem is you? Liana shook her head weakly. He always said he was healthy. His mother blamed me too. Maybe they are right. Serena gripped her shoulders, her voice firm and unyielding. "No, Liana. Tomorrow, I am taking you to a doctor. We are going to find the truth, not Adrian's lies." That night, in Serena's small guest room, Liana lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Tears slid silently into her pillow. But for the first time in years, a fragile thought whispered inside her heart. Maybe the truth will be different. The next morning, Serena kept her promise. She took Liana to one of Bayford's most respected clinics. Dr. Harris, a calm man with gentle eyes, greeted her kindly. "Miss Carter," he said, "we will run every test, blood work, ultrasound, hormone levels. When we are done, you will have answers." For hours, Liana sat in waiting rooms, her hands trembling, her heart heavy with dread. For 7 long years, she had carried the belief that she was broken. If the results confirmed it, she feared she would never stand again. 2 days later, she returned with Serena by her side. Dr. Harris studied the charts, then lifted his gaze with a steady smile. "Miss Carter, I have good news. Your body is healthy. Every test shows you are fully capable of having children." The words struck her like lightning. She blinked, her lips trembling. "You mean, there is nothing wrong with me?" "Nothing at all," he replied firmly. "If there was no pregnancy, then the issue may not lie with you. Your husband should have been tested." Tears flooded Liana's eyes. Her hand flew to her mouth as sobs escaped her. Serena jumped to her feet, fierce and vindicated. "I knew it. He blamed you to cover his shame. Liana, you were never the problem." Liana's voice shook as she wept. "For years, I begged God to forgive me for being incomplete, but I was never incomplete." Dr. Harris spoke softly, his words like a balm on her wounded heart. "Remember this, Miss Carter. You are not cursed. When you find the right partner, you will have the family you deserve." When Liana left the clinic that day, the chains of guilt that had bound her for 7 years finally broke. And deep inside her, a quiet fire began to burn. With Serena's encouragement, Liana decided she could not live in the shadows of her past forever. She had to stand up, even if it meant starting from nothing. So she began small, just a wooden food stand outside Serena's home. Every morning she cooked with love, bowls of hot soup, bread still warm from the oven, simple meals that carried the comfort of home. At first, customers came slowly, a few dock workers on their way to the shipyard, students rushing to class, taxi drivers searching for a quick bite. But soon, word spread. People returned not only for the food, but for the gentle woman behind the counter. The one who always served with a quiet smile. One afternoon, as she ladled soup into a bowl, a deep voice teased from the other side of the counter. "Make it spicy. I like food that fights back." The unexpected joke startled her, and for the first time in months, Liana laughed. The man introduced himself as Victor Hayes, a marine engineer who worked at the docks nearby, tall, steady, with eyes that seemed to carry the calm of the ocean. He began to return, again and again, sometimes for 2 meals, sometimes just one, but always with a kind word, always with a story or a smile. Without realizing it, Liana started to wait for the sound of his footsteps approaching her stand. He never asked about her past, never pressed her for answers. He simply showed up, steady as the tide, bringing light to her long, weary days. One evening, after the last customer had left, Victor lingered. He looked at her little stand, then back at her. "I do not know what you have been through, Liana," he said gently, "but I see something rare in you, a quiet strength, and I admire that." Her breath caught. No one had spoken to her that way in years, not as a failure, not as a burden, but as a woman with worth. And in that moment, deep in her chest, something long forgotten stirred to life again. As the months passed, Victor's presence became a steady light in Liana's life. He never rushed her, never tried to erase her scars. He simply stood by her, showing her through patience and kindness that not every man was like Adrian. One evening, as they sat by the shore watching the waves crash against the rocks, Victor spoke softly. "I once had a family," he confessed, "but an accident took my wife years ago. For a long time, I thought my heart had closed forever. Then I met you." Liana's heart tightened. She lowered her gaze. "Victor, I am afraid. I was broken once. I do not know if I could survive another heartbreak." Victor turned to her, his eyes calm and steady as the sea. "I am not Adrian. I am not here to destroy you. I only want the chance to protect you, to honor you, for as long as you let me." Her defenses began to crumble, and when Victor knelt before her months later, holding out a simple ring, his words pierced through her soul. "I do not want perfection. I want you." Tears ran down her face as she whispered. Yes. Their wedding was small, nothing like the extravagance of Bayford's elite, just close friends, simple vows, and love that felt pure. Serena cheered the loudest, laughing and shouting, "See? I told you life had more for you." But the greatest surprise came not long after. Liana began to feel tired, her body restless, her cravings strange. Victor, worried, insisted she see a doctor. When the results came back, the doctor smiled. "Congratulations, Mrs. Hayes. You are pregnant, and not with 1 child, but with 3. The world seemed to spin. Liana covered her mouth as tears poured down her cheeks. Victor pulled her close, his own eyes wet. 3 at once. This is a miracle. And months later, when 3 healthy boys were placed in her arms, Liana wept with joy. I was never barren. I was never worthless. These children are my proof. In that moment, surrounded by love, she knew she had finally found her true family. While Liana's life blossomed with love and laughter, Adrian Walker continued chasing shadows. He moved from one relationship to another, but none lasted. His mansion felt emptier by the day, filled with wealth but starved of peace. Then came Camille Price, a glamorous fashion designer from New York, elegant, confident, celebrated by the media. Together, they became Bayford's newest power couple. One evening, as they sat sipping wine in a rooftop lounge, Camille looked at him and said plainly, Adrian, we do not need to waste time. If you are serious, then marry me. For Adrian, it was perfect. A grand wedding with Camille would restore his image, erase the memory of Liana, and prove to the world that he was still untouchable. He hired the best planners, booked the most lavish seaside hall, filled the guest list with politicians, celebrities, and business giants. Nothing would be spared, but there was one final detail. As he reviewed the list of invitations, Adrian leaned over to the event manager and said with a cold smile, "There is one person who must sit in the front row." The manager frowned. "Who is that, sir?" Adrian wrote the name himself, Liana Carter. The manager hesitated. "Your ex-wife, are you sure?" Adrian smirked. "Send her the most expensive invitation. I want her sitting there, watching me rise higher than ever. I want her to regret every day of her barren life." Days later, in her cozy little home, Liana was cradling one of her sons when Serena stormed in, holding a gold-trimmed envelope. "You will not believe who this is from," Serena said, tossing it onto the table. Liana opened it slowly. The bold letters read, "Adrian Walker and Camille Price, the Royal Union." Serena's face burned with fury. "He has lost his mind. After everything he did to you, he dares to send you this? It is an insult." But Liana did not flare with anger. Instead, she smiled softly, her eyes calm and steady. "He wants me broken. But this time, the woman in the front row will not be the loser." Serena blinked in disbelief. "You mean, you are going to the wedding?" Liana looked down at her 3 sons playing on the carpet, their laughter filling the room. She whispered, "Yes, I will go, and Adrian will see the truth he refused to face." The day of Adrian's wedding arrived, and the city of Bayford buzzed with excitement. It was called the Wedding of the Year. The seaside hall was draped in white roses, golden candles flickered on every table, and cameras flashed as the elite of the city took their seats. Adrian stood at the altar in his white tuxedo, pride written across his face. To him, this was more than a wedding. It was a performance, a show of power. And in his mind, he imagined Liana sitting quietly in the front row, broken, watching him rise. But the moment came that no one expected. Outside, a black Bentley glided to a stop. Murmurs rippled through the hall. When the door opened, silence fell. Liana stepped out. She wore a gown of golden silk that shimmered in the light. Her head was held high, her face calm, radiant, unshaken. And walking beside her, 3 little boys dressed alike in crisp white shirts and golden bow ties, their small hands clinging to hers. Gasps echoed through the hall. "Is that Liana? She has children! Not just one, triplets!" Adrian's face drained of color. Camille, halfway down the aisle, froze. For the first time in her glamorous life, she realized the spotlight was not on her. Every eye turned to Liana. Liana walked forward, steady and graceful. Her children climbing onto her lap as she sat in the front row. One of them whispered, "Mom, why is everyone looking at us?" She bent down, kissed his hair, and whispered back, "Let them look, my love. Today, truth speaks louder than lies." Adrian stumbled forward, his voice breaking. "No, this cannot be real." Camille turned sharply to him, her voice cutting like glass. "Adrian, who is she? And those children, what are they?" The hall fell into a tense hush, everyone waiting for an answer. Liana rose to her feet, her youngest son in her arms. Her voice rang clear and strong. "You once called me barren, worthless. Tonight, before the world, these children stand as proof of the truth you denied." The triplets waved, their laughter innocent, but the impact shattered the hall. Cameras flashed wildly, guests whispered furiously. and Camille's face twisted with rage. She ripped the veil from her head and threw her bouquet to the floor. "You lied to me, Adrian. You humiliated her, and now you humiliate me. I will not marry a man like you." She stormed out, bridesmaids scrambling after her. And Adrian Walker, once Bayford's proudest man, was left standing alone, humiliated before the very people he had hoped to impress. The hall erupted in chaos. Guests whispered to one another, phones lifted high to capture every moment. Reporters scribbled furiously, their cameras flashing like lightning. The story was writing itself. Adrian Walker, the man who once seemed untouchable, brought to his knees at his own wedding. Camille spun on him, her eyes blazing. "You made me a fool, Adrian. You lied to me. You destroyed her. And now the whole city laughs at us. I will not be your wife." Adrian reached for her, desperate, his voice shaking. "Camille, wait, please." I thought she could not. But Camille shoved him away, her words cutting through the golden hall. "You blamed her for your own failure. You humiliated her. And now you humiliate me. A man like you deserves nothing." With that, she tore off her veil and stormed out, her heels striking the marble floor like thunder. The bridesmaids rushed after her, leaving Adrian alone under the harsh lights. Voices rose all around him. What a disgrace! He ruined her life for years, and all along, the problem was his. Adrian stood frozen, sweat dripping down his temples, his world collapsing in the eyes of everyone who once envied him. Meanwhile, Liana rose from her seat. She took the hands of her 3 boys and walked calmly toward the exit. There was no arrogance in her step, only dignity. Serena met her at the doors, eyes bright with pride. "You did it, Liana. Bayford will never forget this day." Liana kissed the heads of her children and whispered softly, "I did not come for revenge. I came for the truth." And as she left the hall, all eyes followed her. Behind her, Adrian Walker sank to his knees at the altar, burying his face in his hands, the image of a man who had finally lost everything. The scandal spread faster than wildfire. By the next morning, headlines screamed across Bayford. Business tycoon exposed at the altar. Ex-wife returns with triplets. Adrian Walker's empire crumbles. Investors pulled out. Contracts were canceled. Business partners who once begged for his time now avoided his calls. Even his mother, Margaret, sat in silence, unable to defend him. For the first time in his life, Adrian Walker was truly alone. Nights in the mansion grew darker. He sat with a bottle of whiskey, staring into empty rooms that once hosted glittering parties. And in every shadow, he saw her, Liana, walking in with 3 little boys, the family he had claimed she could never give him. At last, desperation broke his pride. One evening, he went to her. Liana was at home, her sons laughing on the floor with their toys, when a knock came at the door. Serena answered, and her face hardened the moment she saw him. "You have no right to be here," she snapped. But behind her, Liana's calm voice called out. "Let him in." Adrian stepped inside, his once proud shoulders bent, his eyes hollow. He sank to his knees before her, his voice cracking. "Liana, I was blind. I destroyed you with my words, and now I have destroyed myself. I blamed you for my own shame. Please, forgive me." Her children fell silent, watching with wide, innocent eyes. Serena crossed her arms, anger burning in her stare. But Liana stood tall, her voice steady, her heart unshaken. "Adrian, I forgave you long ago. Not because you deserved it, but because I needed to free myself from you. But forgiveness does not mean return." Adrian lifted his head, hope flickering. "Then, we could try again. Please, Liana." She shook her head gently. I have a family now, a husband who loves me, children who are my joy. You are no longer part of my life." The words broke him. His sobs filled the room, heavy and raw. And when he finally rose to leave, Adrian Walker was no longer the man the city once feared. He was just a man defeated by his own lies. In the months that followed, Adrian Walker faded from the headlines. His empire collapsed piece by piece. The mansion that once overflowed with parties and praise now stood in silence, cold and empty. He was remembered not for his power, but for his fall. But far from that emptiness, in a modest home near the shore, life was full of warmth. Every evening, laughter echoed through the little house. 3 boys ran to the door as Victor returned from work, their tiny arms wrapping around his legs. Liana stood in the kitchen doorway, watching the scene with a smile that reached her eyes. Victor pulled her into his arms and whispered, "You survived the storm, and you came out shining. I am proud of you, Liana." She leaned into him, her voice soft but sure. "I did not win by hurting anyone, Victor. I won by surviving, and by finding you and them." That night, after the children were asleep, Liana opened a drawer. Inside lay a folded letter, Adrian's final apology. She looked at it for a long moment, then closed the drawer without reading. The past no longer had power over her. Outside, the sea breeze carried the scent of salt and freedom. And inside, the home rang with laughter and love. Liana Carter, once cast aside as barren and worthless, now stood as living proof of resilience, of grace, of a woman who rose from ashes and built her own peace. And her story, from that day on, could be told in 2 simple words: peace found.